All right, everyone, we're back for a editor podcast with the Spoon Crew. I'm going to go around the horn, the very small horn. Jen Marston, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing good. I'm wearing flannel. Chris commented before we recorded on how I'm looking very Northwestern and grungy.
Yeah, super grunge.
Kind of both of you are. I don't think the audience can see, but you're really paying tribute to the early 90s in your region.
Yeah, I've got my Gin Blossoms hair.
You really do. Yeah.
I got a cut on Allison Road, or not cut, as it were. Yeah, what's up, Mike? How you doing?
Good. Our hair places closed in Washington State again? I know.
I don't think so.
I know they shut down restaurants, which we could talk about on the podcast. Hairstylists probably not as much relevance, but we are in the middle of the pandemic. Shutdowns are going across the nation. But we're not going to talk about that too much on the pod. I want to talk about robots to start off, Chris, because you have a story about, is it Servy now? What's the name of like Postmates robot?
Oh, so it's called Serve. Because not to be confused with Bear Robotics Servy, which is an in-house restaurant rotor. Yeah. So Bear makes a Servy, Postmates makes Serve. And what's interesting is they just launched in West Hollywood. They partnered with, so they've been doing deliveries around the Hollywood area for a while, sort of as tests, but Pink Dot now has sort of branded the Postmates robot to do deliveries around West Hollywood. So if you are a resident of West Hollywood, you can order stuff from the Pink Dot market and have it deliver you by robot free of extra delivery fee to get it delivered via robot. But this is interesting just for a few reasons. One, it just shows the continued sort of adoption of robotics for deliveries, especially for sort of small market items like you want, I don't know, a bag of cookies or something, right? You get a robot, wheel it on out to you. But what was also interesting is that it's not a Postmates. I mean, it's a Postmates robot, but it's branded as Pink Dot. So those robots are just going to serve Pink Dot, right? So instead of a Postmates robot going to a bunch of different restaurants and, you order it when you're in the Postmates app, choosing the delivery option, from one of your local restaurants, they're branded, they're pink, they're bright, they're fun, they're playful. Pink Dot wants you to take pictures with them, selfies with them. So it's just really, I think it's another thing to watch. And I have a friend actually who lives in West Hollywood. So I've asked him to place an order and then describe it for us, just to see what the whole experience is like, in terms of how long it takes and unlocking it and all of that kind of stuff.
Is this the same friend that caught it in the wild, a video of it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's a cute robot. Like, of all the robots we see, this may be one of the cuter ones. It has a little face on it, at least the Postmates version. But this idea of moving into like a white label robot delivery as a service, I wonder if this is like a new area of business for Postmates, because they're basically essentially allowing other companies to basically use its robot exclusively.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that it's because delivery robots. So there's still a lot that needs to happen with delivery robots, right? In terms of like even in nearby Santa Monica, there's a city council there has a whole different set of rules. I think that, they had banned them for a while. Possibly having been burned by those electric scooters that were littering Santa Monica streets. But West Hollywood is allowing it, but there's still a person that follows it. It can only operate during the day, right? So this is all really new territory. And one of the questions is, as these robot companies, so Postmates obviously developed their own robot. Postmates was a delivery service first, so they were developing their robot. But you have others like Kiwi, which are developing robots, and Starship, which are developing. They're all kind of cooler sized robots roaming city streets. But one thing, one of the questions that come up are things like, well, where do the robots stay when they aren't in use? Are they going to clutter up city streets like an electric scooter? If you have them if you are leasing them directly to a company, right? And I don't know if it's a lease agreement between Pink Dot and Postmates or whatever, but if they're Pink Dot branded robots, they're going to live at Pink Dot, right? They're not going to be all over the city streets. And Pink Dot is also going to be responsible, presumably for charging them, whereas if you have other robots serving multiple restaurants, well, where do they stay when they aren't in use? And how are they getting charged? And who's picking them up at the end of the day, right? There are all these questions around it. So I think it's interesting also, not only from a business perspective, like you said, Mike, but just in terms of logistically, how are these things going to incorporate into our daily lives, into the lives of a city?
I kind of wonder, it makes me think about some of the things we've talked about in terms of with delivery, some of the ongoing issues about, there are a lot of controversies around the way delivery workers for like DoorDash or Uber Eats or Postmates are treated in terms of payment and benefits and everything. And so, Chris, you've sort of glibly almost, but half serious, said to me in the past, just wait for the robots whenever I bring that up, because it does seem like if a restaurant chain has its own branded robots, it's basically a robotic version of the old days when restaurants had their own in-house folks to deliver the food. So it'd be interesting to see if it changes any sort of the business model of just third-party delivery as we know it right now in terms of who's delivering the food. That's obviously, if there's a robot, it's probably going to bring the cost down quite a bit.
Well, that's Kiwi's whole thing, right? Like their whole thing is like, well, it's a $4.99. They're in San Jose. And every time I've spoken with them, it's like, well, it's $4.99 now, but next year it'll be $2.99. And then eventually we want to democratize it so that anybody can get any kind of food anytime they want, right? And that's the whole purpose, is you can have a robot running, as long as the batteries go, but, or swap that out. Or anyway, but the point is they could run all day and night and they could be making deliveries, and you just can't have that with people. That, of course, that's a whole other, thicket of ethical and societal issues in terms of, well, what do you do when entry-level driver jobs are not available, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a serious issue and one that needs to be dealt with. But if these work out, and we're still very early on, right? Like we got to see how well they integrate onto our sidewalks and how people take to them and if they're reliable. And there's all sorts of things that need to be that are unknown at this point. But theoretically, yeah, the idea is like, this will open up delivery to more people more often, and should be cheaper for the people running it because they don't have as high a labor cost. And also, if you think about, we talk about third-party delivery, and especially in places like Los Angeles, right? Like you got to drive everywhere in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So if you're a delivery driver who is double parking on the sidewalk or needs to find, as you run into a restaurant to grab meals and then run back out, where are you parking? Where are you driving? Ghost kitchens do some of that to alleviate that. But then when you arrive at somebody's house, there's all sorts of infrastructure things that go along with that as well for full-sized automobiles.
Yeah, it feels part and parcel to a lot of the big changes happening in the restaurant and just even physical store designs of restaurants changing to accommodate places for vehicles, whether they're, they haven't mentioned robots specifically, but, you can see maybe there in the future will be an area where the little rover bots wait to get loaded up with food and head out. Maybe they're even branded. Like, I don't know, that might be terrifying to see a fleet of McDonald's rover bots going down the street.
Yeah, but what if they were like, emitting the smell of French fries as they drove on by?
Or they were a little mini Ronald McDonald or hamburgers. That would actually be kind of cute.
Speaking of, I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but Jen, I know that we've written a lot about drive-throughs and off-prem eating for the past, especially during the pandemic. And one of the things I noticed, my local McDonald's has now 2 drive-through lanes, which I don't recall ever seeing. They did a remodel last year, but I think there was still just 1 drive-through lane. But now I noticed that they had made the space and doubled up, which I think is just really interesting how quickly that happened.
Yeah, McDonald's and tons of others are on a mad dash to renovate store formats and double drive-through, triple drive-through lanes in some cases.
5 blades.
Yeah,
like the Mach 3. You spoke earlier about the changing design of restaurants, Chris, around how you would incorporate robotics. There's an interesting story in the Wall Street Journal about drone delivery to homes and how that will actually start to impact home design. And they had a little graphic of a house, is a computer graphic with a little hole in the top of the roof that opened up, and people can a little drone can drop a hamburger in. And you get an alert that your hamburger's arrived. You walk up and get your drone delivered hamburger. So it'll be interesting to see how even the home side, the receiving side of where we live, adapts to robotic and drone delivery.
Well, you remember
I want a drone dressed as the Hamburglar deliver a burger into my house, please.
It's better than a drone dressed as Grimace. Well, do you remember, Mike, that patent? I think where is it? You uncovered it anyway, where like the Scout robot from Amazon would like live in your house, and then it would venture out to get your packages from some mobile hub. There are all sorts of changes that are going to be coming. I like the idea of a little like mini drone helipad built into your house, or something, so you can accept that latte that's being dropped down to you.
So much has to do with regulatory approval, and this kind of segues into our next story. Speaking of regulatory approval, we're going to actually go down a bunch of like cultured meat stories because it's been cultured meat mania here in the food tech world. But Jen, you wrote about the story where Just got regulatory approval in, perhaps not too surprisingly, Singapore, to sell cultured chicken as part of a chicken nugget packaged food. Singapore has certainly been aggressive and progressive in terms of trying to accommodate for culture meat and other sorts of food tech, because they're one of these countries that really sees food tech as a strategic initiative, because they don't produce a lot of their food in country. So talk a little bit about the story. This was a world first, as far as I can tell, the first regulatory approval for cultured meat.
Yeah, the first in the world. And Eat Just worked directly with the Singapore Food Agency, which is the city-state's kind of regulatory watchdog around food. And they deemed it basically safe for human consumption, which means that Eat Just gets to commercialize these cultured chicken bites, basically. So they are So that product is going to start out in restaurants, and then, we'll see where it goes from there. I mean, it's. I think the interesting thing about this story, besides the fact that it's kind of a big step, because the regulatory approval issue with cultured meat is somebody at SKS this past year, and it might have been Josh Tetrick, said, you can have the greatest cultured meat product in the world, but if you can't get regulatory approval in a certain country, you're not going to have a market there. It just won't be possible. So this is definitely a really important milestone, like not just for Eat Just, but also for the whole cell-based meat industry. I think it's also really in keeping the fact that they're launching it in restaurants first is right in line with those kind of 4 stages he went through during our SKS talk, where it's like, okay, you have the successful prototype, and then you can get the prototype, into a restaurant, and then maybe get it into a few restaurants, and on until you reach retail stores and, eventually that kind of ubiquitousness that we see with products like McDonald's or Coca-Cola or things that are sold all over the world. So, yeah, this is obviously a really, really long way off from there, but I think it's, and I think you're right, Mike. I think it's not surprising that it happened in Singapore, because Singapore is really invested in how do they move away from 90% of their food being imported, and how do they enable their city-state to produce more food locally. So, the Singapore government has just been pumping tons of money and effort into innovation around food. So it just lines up that it being the first place to give regulatory approval for cell-based meat. No surprises there. It did happen really quickly, I feel like.
Yeah. By the way, it's Eat Just or Just Eat, because there's Eat Just. Eat Just. Yes. There's also not to be confused with Just Eat, which is another startup. I feel like food tech's this space where everyone's trying to create a variant of the word, some sort of food. It feels like the cloud computing world, like 10 years ago, where you just had all these different names that are very similar. So, but yeah, this is not surprising that it's both Singapore and also Just. Although I will say, chicken nuggets were not the food I was expecting when Josh Tetrick was laying out, hey, we might see cultured meat first in a high-end restaurant, and then maybe rolled out to multiple restaurants. I think it's probably a product of the fact that they're doing chicken cultured meat that is probably not super you're not doing like a chicken breast at this point. You're basically doing small samples that could be put into a nugget at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to recontextualize his talk in terms of, okay, well, they got regulatory approval. Where was he at in that process when he was talking at SKS, right? Like,
so he said at SKS that they hoped to get, he was very vague about it, but he said they hoped to get regulatory approval by the end of 2020, if not, then in 2021. So my assumption is that this was clearly in the works when that talk was happening.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I was just wondering at like what point, like what things were they already working through? Like what had the Singapore government already said to them? Like you need to do this, this, and this in order to get approval. So I was just thinking about his talk and his outline for 10 years or whatever, 15 years or whatever it was, just knowing that he was knee deep in that process, but more so that process seemed like it may have had a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say they said that they spent months and months and months documenting their process to show to the Singapore Food Agency. So they were clearly probably at the tail end of getting this approval when that talk happened.
Each one of these stories that comes out around Culture Meat marching forward, I'm wondering how well Pat Brown's declaration that this industry will not scale, how well that ages over time. It seems like may not age well. But I'm not going to second guess Pat Brown. He's a lot smarter than I am. But
I think,
dummy.
But I think you bring up a good point comes to mind, and I think Pat Brown, this is my interpretation of what he said. I think he was probably more referring to that phase of the ubiquitous cell cultured meat where you can buy it in a fast food chain, where you can buy it for your tailgate party if those happen ever again, at the grocery store and things like that. I think one thing that every cell-based meat producer I have spoken to in the last year agrees on is that there is a massive difference between a successful prototype or a prototype that people want to try in a restaurant and getting to that mass market mainstream consumer phase. Like there's a huge difference in that because of the issue of bringing the cost down so that production can scale up and things like that. So I definitely wouldn't just say, okay, Pat Brown's completely wrong. Like, let's move on. Like there will inevitably be some big challenges as we start to go through this next phase where more companies get regulatory approval and they are trying to move out of that one restaurant into multiple locations or into the grocery store. So I just think it's worth bearing that in mind as we look at this.
All right.
Well, I also think so Singapore happened last week, right? And then this week, the Prime Minister of Israel was eating a cultured steak, right? And there was a minister in France, I don't remember, who was like, we don't want.
It was France, yeah.
We don't want cultured meat here. I really was making sure I didn't do a French accent just then. That would have been real fun to slip into, but like probably not appropriate. Anyway, the point is like what we're seeing is that this is reaching sort of like governmental level, right? Like before it was, I don't know, VCs who got a sneak peek or chefs or, very private tastings. And now in the manner of just 2 weeks, we've seen it elevated to the highest levels of government. So I just think that that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I want to hear your Pepe Le Pew.
I'd like to alienate all of our French listeners Macron. Right now.
Speaking of culture meat, this next story might turn off a few people, but like Jen, you wrote about how there's a guy who basically created a kit to create cell cultured human meat for consumption, and he had all sorts of caveats around it. He said, like, we're not really going to necessarily do this. People aren't really going to eat human meat, but then he, at the same time, he also said, well, you could if you wanted to.
Yeah. So, to clarify for our listeners who might start thinking I'm a cannibal,
you're a vampire. Yeah. Difference.
You didn't do a home test or review of the human meat. consumption. You basically wrote about it. That's next.
That's coming out next week. Don't spoiler alert, man.
Gift guide.
Gift guide. Yeah, I'd like my own human steak kit for Christmas, please. That can be cooked in the Bon Bowl.
Yeah.
Oh, sizzling.
Okay, to clarify, so this was part of a design competition that the Design Museum in London did, and they didn't actually eat the human steaks. This was basically a design prototype that had all the pieces in which you could basically take the process for making cultured meat and apply it to humans you could take a cell sample from your own body and put it into that process and create a mini steak from it using your own cells. So that's what the design was, and it was nominated for, I believe it was nominated for Design of the Year by the London Design Museum. But it was actually a statement on cultured meat and calling into question some of the ethics around it. So this is obviously bigger picture, something else that's going to come up as cultured meat progresses, which is, I think most of the folks listening here at least have heard fetal bovine serum, which is the media that's used to make a lot of the cultured beef products. Should we get into the graphic details of what that is?
Sure. Well, I mean, at a high level, we could talk about how the old meat industry is trying to move away from it because it is a fairly inhumane.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a number of cultured meat companies that are looking for different types of media. There's some that are even making different types of media. But that's what this concept basically was. It's just calling into question the ethics around using certain media to create cell-based meat. I think, up until very recently, that whole thing about it's meat without the animal was sort of not necessarily a true pitch just because of FBS. But again, having said all that, there are a number of companies that are trying to move away from FBS, and some who flat out refuse to use it. There's a company in Austin called BioBQ that when I spoke to them, they were just absolutely emphatic about, no, we are not using FBS as the media in our products.
Yep. I think Mosa Meat has been another one that's been pretty early on pioneering an alternative to FBS. So I think the vast majority of people in the space are coalescing around the idea that we want to move away from this the inhumane use of certain types of media. But getting back to, you're trying to avoid the question, Jen, around this eating of human meat. So I think this is where we separate people. Who would actually eat cultured human steak versus who wouldn't? I think I was grossed out by the concept. Jen, I don't think you were.
No, I'd sample my own cells and turn them into steak.
Oh, but that's different. Your own cells. But
that's what the project was. Now, I mean, I guess
if you were served like a Mike burger, a Wolf burger.
A Wolf burger.
Send it back. Send it back to Grizzly.
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to probably lose a lot of followers with this statement, but I don't know that I would say no, honestly. I'm not saying I'd become like a diehard devotee, but I might
the slippery
try
slope.
It.
That's what they all say.
It is like a good ethical question, right? Like if you were to do cultured human, doubt like 10 years from now, this becomes like you could buy the cultured meat kit off of Best Buy, right? In 15 years, just do it at home using IntegraCulture's platform, whatever. And you start to just recreate human steaks. Like, what are the ethical boundaries there? I think these are the things, to your point, Jen, we're going to have to wrestle with as a society.
I mean, does anybody remember that movie Alive about the plane crash in the Andes Mountains where they had to eat one another to survive? Like, they should have had a human steak cultured meat kit.
Soylent Green.
Using their GoSun solar cooker.
You know what, though? I think that movie was based on a true story, so maybe edit that comment out. But, I mean, it does bring up interesting ethical issues, because if someone said, do you want to try a Mike burger? Well, presumably the burger's been made with a Mike Wolf cell sample. We're not slaughtering Mike Wolf to get the end product.
No. It's a outpatient procedure to get a biopsy of some sort.
I'm sure there will be a drive-through option at some point.
Yeah, look, some of us are just going to taste better than others, and it's going to be. I mean, you really want that rich marbling.
Is that the 10 years from now? Is that like the new branding opportunity? Buy the Kanye West burger and actually eat Kanye West? Like, I mean,
I would say no to in a heartbeat.
But it's a weird concept, right? Like right now, it's like we have Pizza Aoki, which is Steve Aoki is doing a cloud kitchen with his branding. So clearly, people want to fuse celebrity together with food in new ways. Just is the logical extension of that 10 years from now, you're just doing cultured celebrity.
That is a Black Mirror episode, it sounds like.
Yeah, and we're going in a weird direction. So let's bring it back. Let's kind of like let's pull back from the abyss here and talk about our gift guides. The 2020 gift guide does not include a human meat cultured DIY kit, but it does include things like, Jen, I think you had the Bon Bowl, which we are not getting paid by Bon Bowl. We just have someone on the staff who loves the Bon Bowl. That was one of your recommendations.
Yes, it was. No, Bon Bowl is not giving us kickbacks. It just happens to be a very small, very useful kitchen device. I wrote a whole review about it, which Mike and Chris can attest to. I won't shut up about it now. Bon Bowl, for those of you who aren't familiar, is just an induction cooktop. It's very small. It comes with an accompanying bowl, and you can cook single serving meals in it and then just eat right out of the bowl. So it's really simple in terms of what it can do. But I have one and have done, scrambled an egg, made soup, made noodles, reheated food. I mean, I could go on and on and on. It also functions as a fifth burner sometimes. If you're making a big meal, you can just use the Bon Bowl to heat sauces and stuff. So, I don't know. I think there's a lot of use cases for this. I mean, kids aren't in dormitories right now, but when that day comes again, that's an obvious one. And it's also just simpler. I mean, I don't necessarily think you have to be living alone to get use out of it. I mean, sometimes you just want to heat some oatmeal and call that dinner. So I think the Bon Bowl is perfect
breakfast for dinner. That. I'm a big fan. Chris, what were your recommendations?
Well, I had now I have to remember. What the beer maker was among the ones. My list. I had a beer maker and a Crowd Cow gift certificate and a Philips Seiko, a super automatic espresso maker. But the beer maker is the interesting one, I think. I spent a couple of weeks with the beer maker. I don't drink beer. I don't really like beer, but what it does is it's a countertop connected beer brewing and fermentation system. So it's all in one. You don't have to use any hoses, no buckets, no bottles. It really makes it idiot proof, which is why I said I was the right idiot to try it out. And you fill it with water. There's an app that gives you all the instructions. You can buy a DIY kit or you can just do it on your own. You pour the grains in, pour your water. It does a bunch of stuff. Then the app goes, hey, grains are done. Time to pitch your yeast. So you dump out the grains, you throw in the yeast and the hops, and then it does a bunch of fermentation stuff. And then 9 days later, you have a gallon of beer. I think it's a gallon. It might be a little more, but it's you have this bag of beer that you put into a dispenser and keep in your fridge, and you stick in a carbonation, a CO2 cartridge. And it works really well. Even though I don't really like the taste of beer, I was able to make beer first time out. And it was good as I shared it with other people, and they could all attest. I made a stout that even to my limited palate tasted very chocolatey, and was, if people like that kind of thing, it would be really good. And it wasn't really sedimenty, like home brews can get kind of sedimenty. And I don't know, I've never really enjoyed anybody who walks over is like, here, I made this beer. I'm like, oh boy. But it's really useful. I got some flack in the comments because I'm not a big beer drinker, but I think the point was more, if I could do it, then anybody could do it. And if they had more knowledge about it, they could get more out of it. What I like about the beer maker is that it's open and you could throw in literally anything you wanted. So if you have a bunch of raspberries, throw it in. Dandelions, licorice, it doesn't care.
Have they done any sort of recipes or guides on how to do something like kombucha? I know you don't like kombucha, but anything that's a fermented beverage, I wonder if you could try other fermented beverages besides beer.
They didn't yet. They're a small company. They've been around for a while. They made something called the Brew Jacket, which was like a fermentation temperature control system for traditional home brewing. And so this is kind of their first all-in-one product out of the gate. As such, there were some quirks to it. There were some things that didn't work. You know, there were some hiccups in the app and some recipe things, but nothing that was like a deal breaker. And they were really quick to sort of fix it. So I think they're really trying to nail down the beer system first before expanding into any other sort of fermented beverage. Because I imagine it wouldn't stop you. I don't know the process for making cider, but I imagine that you could. I mean, seems like that's something you could do. I don't know, but I think that it's $4.99, so it isn't cheap. But if you have a beer lover in your life or somebody who likes home brewing but doesn't like all the work associated with it or wants to get into it, I think it's a really really fun, useful device.
But can you make root beer with it? That's the big question.
I haven't tried. But I'll get back to you on that.
Well, my recommendations were largely for people on a budget. Unlike you guys who were not considering people who might not have money this year. Chris, with your $499 beer making machine. I'm just giving you a bad time. Now, I did kind of go a little bit down budget with mine recommendations. So they weren't super exciting, but they were practical, right? So I had I'm blanking. I have to edit this out. What's the bag?
Carbon steel pans.
Oh yeah, the carbon steel pan. One was the carbon steel pan, which I don't know if you guys have tried to season pans. Or have used cast iron. My cast iron I have is just so immensely heavy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to try something different, and I've been a fan of Meissen. I bought their knives. I actually bought a Dutch oven from them, which is still on the way. And I decided to buy their carbon steel pans, which are actually a lot cheaper than other carbon steel pans I've seen. So I recommended that. I also recommended the Stasher bags, just trying to increasingly move away from using Ziploc or plastic where I can. And as I've had for the past year or two, when I sous vide, I don't like to use shrink wrap or vacuum sealed plastic or Ziplocs. I want to use Stasher because I don't want that leaching of plastic chemicals into my meat, and I don't want to throw out plastic. So I think Stashers, even though they're kind of expensive, it's like $20 for like a half-gallon bag. I think it's $30 for the big jumbo size.
They're great though.
You can use it over and over.
They're great. I love the Stasher bags.
Yeah.
I just ordered some after I read your piece, Mike.
The founder, I think her name's Kat. She pitched us, I think, for the Startup Showcase like years ago. And then I think about a year later, she ended up on Shark Tank. And then Mark Cuban invested in Stasher, which he doesn't do a lot of food investment because I've actually asked him to come to Smart Kitchen Summit. He's like, I'm not that into food. But he invested in Stasher. I guess he saw a good opportunity there, maybe for like plastic waste reduction.
Yeah.
And my other recommendation was Pantry Chic, which, speaking of Startup Showcase companies, they pitched for the original Startup Showcase way back in 2015. They're an interesting company founded by Nikki and Chris Lee. And they've been working on this thing forever. As you guys, Chris, you've been following the journey of Pantry Chic. It's basically a smart storage system. They've actually had it patented, and they finally got it to market after like 5 or 6 year journey.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I had wondered where, Pantry Chic for a long time was MIA. And now they're out, and that's really great to see because we have been sort of chronicling them for a long time.
You kind of have to give it to them. And it was invented by Nicole Lee. She goes by Nikki as well, who was in pharmaceutical. She's not like a technology executive at all. And she just decided, like a lot of these people, it kind of reminds me of the Rhodiomatic, right? Someone who's basically had a need at home and decided to create an invention. And she created the Pantry Chic concept, went through the process of getting it patented, found a manufacturer, and eventually after 5 years got it to market. So I hope they do well. And so I put them on my gift guide. You can buy it now. I think it's Pantry Chic or whatever. You can also buy it at Amazon.
Yeah. That's cool.
By the way, I think, Chris, did you recommend the Dash egg cooker? I think that's one of your favorite devices, right?
Oh yeah. That was a couple of years ago, but I highly recommend the Dash egg cooker.
I went and bought that for my son who's going off to college, and he's living at home now. So I'm hoping to use it for a while.
Did you get the half dozen one?
I got just the 4 one. Should I have gone up?
Well, if you're going for a family, like if I were to do it again, I probably would have gone with the full dozen. Just because making the hard-boiled eggs is so easy, we eat them more often. But a six one's great, especially if it's for your son before he goes off to college. Yeah, 20 minutes, pour in the water, poke the eggs. 20 minutes later, boom, perfectly cooked hard-boiled eggs every time.
Hard-boiled. You can do soft-boiled.
Yep.
It even says scrambled. I don't know how you're doing scrambled, but I
don't know.
But yeah, so that's a cool one as well. So, any other gift recommendations, guys?
Well, one thing I recommended that is actually pretty affordable is the Imperfect Produce, which is a food rescue company that grabs surplus food from grocery stores and restaurants and sells it at a discount price. They have a holiday gift, like a holiday snack box. So if anyone wants to throw a environmentally conscious holiday snack menu, they put together these boxes, and it's like there's nothing wrong with the food other than pretzels broke in production or some other cosmetically imperfect feature. But I thought that one was just a really cool way to kind of try to get the whole food rescue concept to more people.
Yeah, and I put Crowd Cow gift certificate on mine. I have the salmon that I have been like, oh my gosh, the salmon that they got. They had some Norwegian, hopefully, I think it's sustainably farmed salmon, and it is fantastic. And you can get like a $25 gift certificate to it. And it's like I've been really pleased with the Crowd Cow that we've gotten over the past year.
Chris, my one of my sisters who is a huge fan of your work saw that. Nice. And ordered from Crowd Cow and is now hooked.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we've been following those guys too for a long time. Mm-hmm. They're up here in the Seattle area. And I've just, I eat less. I don't really eat red meat anymore. So really with them, I'm getting kind of chicken for the family, and the fish has just been really, really good. The halibut and the salmon and the Arctic char. It's just been really, really, I've been really pleased with it. So good for them.
All right. Well, that's the Spoon Editor gift guide. We're not making any spiffs or kickbacks on any of these, we promise. But Those are just things. These are just products we like. So check it out. You can actually find the post on the Spoon. But other than that, thanks, guys, for joining me for the podcast. It's been a lot of fun.
Yep. Always a pleasure.
We'll see you later.
Bye.